All right, y'all, I'm gonna get started here. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Come on in, y'all. Just getting started. All right, my name is Ro Kelly. I am a bookseller here at Left Banks, and I, along with our whole team, welcome you to Left Bank Books and to this special evening tonight. Tonight we welcome David Haynes and his new book, Martha's Daughter, from McSweeney's of the Diaspora series. To help lead, And to help lead a thoughtful discussion, we also welcome award-winning author Ron A. Austin to keep the conversation going. Some notes before we begin. Today's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, and it helps keep writers get the support that they deserve by allowing us to produce events like this. So thank you all for shopping local and for being here tonight. We at Left Bank also are always trying to plan new events for readers of all kinds. In 2 days, we welcome Ukrainian researcher Daria Timzaluk to discuss her book, Ecocide in Ukraine, the Environmental Cost of Russia's War. And then on Tuesday, September 16th, we are partnering with the St. Louis County Library to present legal scholar Justin Driver as he discusses his new book, The Fall of Affirmative Action, Race, the Supreme Court, and the Future of Higher Education. If either of those sound compelling to you, please join us back here at Left Bank or at the County Library. And if neither of those sound compelling, please check out our website. We have so many more events. But now for tonight's event. David Haynes is the founder of Kimbilio, a retreat for fiction writers of the African diaspora. Now in its 9th year, Kimbilio boasts a roster of today's most celebrated talent in fiction. David is also an emeritus professor of English at Southern Methodist University, where he directed the creative writing program for 10 years. And Ron A. Austin holds a MFA from UMSL St. Louis and is a 2016 Regional Arts Commission Fellow. He is an assistant professor of English at St. Louis University and the award-winning author of the semi-autobiographical linked story collection, Avery Colt is a Snake, a Thief, a Liar. We are thrilled to welcome both of these authors to help David celebrate his newest book, Martha's Daughter. Praised as intelligent, insightful, generous, and wickedly funny by Natalie Baszile, the author of Sugar Queen, Queen Sugar, these stories are collected for the first time in a gorgeous volume. Steeped in everyday gossip and lives, the collection ranges from the magically real of a city's crumbling superhero to a rundown motel whose long-term guests are lucky to call home. With its full circle connection to David's previous novels, Martha's Daughter is guaranteed to enthrall longtime fans and new readers alike. Thank you all so much for listening to my voice for so long. Without further ado, while you're actually here, let's give a warm welcome to David Haynes and Ron A.
We're going to begin by holding up our copies of the books for the readers.
Nice.
It's a private joke. All right, where should we begin?
Let's have another round of applause for David Haynes. Have the most positive energy. In a past life, I was a cheerleader, so I got to pick it up. But on to darker topics, we got to get into it. So, one thing that I really especially love about your work that is consistent and powerful, in particular, maybe I just really like difficult people, but you are a master of the contrarian, misanthropic character. And just this consistent cynicism that your character conveys. It's something that, it's almost like from semester to semester, I try to push workshop attendees to write unlikable characters, and they're so afraid to do it. But I'm like, really, they're the ones who have the best insight into the world and actual tenderness and love and human connection. But it's a hard sell. But I think your work shows the way. So could you tell us a little bit about where your contrarian characters come from?
Well, Well, first of all, thanks. I think, and one of the things that I just an unrelated note that I would say to my undergrads, because they had the same problem at SMU, which was that they always wanted to make their characters nice people like they are. So, and so, I think that, well, you sort of answered your question, which is that in fact, nice people, good people are just not any fun to write about. And one of the things that makes good stories is you want your characters to make trouble, either for others but primarily for themselves. And so people make trouble, and therefore the stories happen. Happy people, it's just Tolstoy, right? Basic Tolstoy, which is all happy families are alike, and it's the opening of Anna Karenina, right? Which is basically saying that unhappy people are different from each other, and also they're worth talking about, therefore. So that's really just at the heart of it. I mean, I also think that not that this is anything that I would ever do, but as a fiction writer, that writing is a good way just to get even with people. You would put all the people that you want to get even with, but just put ornery thoughts in your head, and let people know what awful people that they are.
This kind of makes me think that in my day-to-day life, I like being kind. I'm very nice, and sometimes folks are surprised with how honest I can be and a little bit cynical. And so when I read your characters that are contrarian, I just see it as a path to just what's truthful. And so how does that truth manifest within your work, or how do you approach truth?
I think, and we talked about this a little bit earlier this evening. I think what I try to do in my writing is that, in fact, because a lot of my characters' stories, a lot of what happens in the stories happens in the characters' heads, and so what my characters are often doing is not saying out loud the things that they're actually thinking, but they're reporting it to the reader, and that irony is always really interesting to me. People who can put on this kind of nice, happy face, or actually do all of the correct social conventions, but inside they're just as evil and ornery as they can be, right? And which I think is like everybody. It's all of these people, all those people up on the camera.
So another way to look at this particular cynicism or shrewdness could be to look at it as an element of the Black experience, specifically in a sense of Afro-pessimism. So when we look at the way that Cynthia approaches the world and she interacts with others, she's actually really gaming things out. She's calculating her steps, but not in really a Machiavellian way, not in any kind of way where I wouldn't necessarily trust her. It's more so I can feel the weight or the pressure that she has to make the right decisions and to consistently put on this performance as of Blackness, of womanhood, and of the position that she occupies in life. So to what extent are you influenced by that idea of Afro-pessimism, or just these kinds of strategies that folks need to employ to get through the day?
I think it's the case that you just have to, the world can be a treacherous place. And we talked a little bit earlier about sort of office politics and the fact that while it seems sometimes worse at the university than it does in other places are just as bad.
Yes.
Your local convenience store politics are just as bad as they are in the English department. And so I may or may not have taught it, right? But I think that so I think in order to not get destroyed by the system, you are constantly having to sort of think your way through how do I behave with this person, or how do I behave in that situation, or when is a good time to keep my mouth closed, or when is a good time to just sort of let it out there. My characters tend to take the path of least resistance, which means that they'll sit and smile and hold their space, hold their place, because that's what's going to serve them best in the long run, rather than blurt it all out there and say the things that they need to be said.
And so one really great example, exactly of this contrarian character and also your humor. I really want to talk about your humor as the sort of the punchline or the major turn of the story is that they run over a cat. Is this story that's right? You're not from Texas. And so what I really love about the narrator here is that he really wants connection. He really wants intimacy. And he also specifically states that he sees the need for positivity. And he almost seems like not jealous in an envious way or in a way that's like spiteful or anything, but he admires it in his potential partner. And then they arrive at the situation where he hits the cat and then she wants to, save the cat and, or do what she can for the situation. So there are a lot of questions that arise here, but how did you come to that turn in setting up this character and then deciding that, like, okay, what would you do if you hit a cat with this partner? How did that become a driver of the story?
That's a question. For those of you that are worried about spoiler alerts, the cat dies like on page 2. So nothing got ruined. I think about the answer to that question. I think that that question actually has a pretty dark backstory, which is that I actually saw I was driving home in Texas as it happened. The story takes place, and there was an irresponsible dog owner in front of me. No, she wasn't in front of me. She was actually over here in this parking lot, and she was somebody that should have never been given this dog. So she sat the dog down to answer her phone. This is one of those tiny little burst dogs here. And of course, the dog, just took off, right? And the car in front of me, for the dog, and stopped, right? And so I just sort of, stopped because I couldn't get around them, but sort of watched this whole thing unfold. And what was interesting to me was that the young woman who was not a responsible animal owner became the victim. It wasn't about the dog. It wasn't about this poor guy, this poor man. There was no way he could have seen the dog coming. I actually was enough far behind that I saw the dog running towards the street, but so there was no way he could stop. And I thought, what a horrible position to be in, and then for the woman to make it about her. And so her first instinct, of course, then was to have a lot of drama, and then of course then to make a phone call. And I thought, and then this is terrible. The dog was sort of still right there on the street, and I thought, oh, this is actually going the right way, right? And so that was what sort of inspired the story, sort of observing that situation where nobody quite knows how to react appropriately to the situation. And so let me put these characters in situation and have them react to it.
Well, I mean, like, I've been accused of time and fear of having a really inappropriate sense of humor. Usually I accuse myself of it. And so what's always exciting to me or interesting is generally the application of humor, as that's something that always enriches the story. It shows kind of a capacity for wisdom, to be able to find the humor in something or make light of something. In a particular sense, I do enjoy a little bit of dark humor, maybe a lot of it. But could you just talk to us more about, because like these stories are consistently funny in the voice, the metaphors, and the way that the characters see the world. And underneath that humor, there's always this cutting commentary. And it's the narrators are always aware of the way that they're exaggerating. And there's a certain amount of awareness of like why it's necessary to see these things and like analyze them in a particular way. But could you talk to us about maybe where the humor comes from? Do you do it intentionally, or is it just something that comes out?
So just in terms of dark humor, the one thing that I almost said that I didn't say was that, so the dog, I'm sorry, the dog was still there in the street, but it was like turned up like the little Monopoly dog. So it wasn't really switched. I didn't say that because that would be tasteless. And that's what happened.
I'm thinking about it.
So, you know, when you took the little Monopoly dog. All right. So the other thing about my characters is that they're also aware, I think, that when they are sort of thinking these things that they sometimes don't actually say out loud, that's also wrong. And so there's also the kind of the self-judgment built into to their own I don't want to say it's inappropriate or dark. I don't know, their own way of being in the world. I think people don't have a lot of control, or don't have a lot of I think whatever person's sensibility is what their sensibility is, right? And so yeah, I think that people whose work is, or whose way of being in the world is, for example, bitter. You know, I think their writing is going to be bitter. It's going to be, you know, or sad, or however that manifests in the page. So that's maybe a long way of me saying that I don't actually think I set out to write things that are funny. You know, I do think that I you know, have always sort of been able to place myself, or be in the world where I can have some distance to what's going on around me. And I think in order to find humor, you have to have that ironic distance. But you have to be able to sort of see things as absurd, because, well, actually, no, it's that, you know, the Mel Brooks construction about comedy, which is that, you know, tragedy is when I drop a bowling ball on my foot, and comedy is when you fall in a hole and die. So well, that's really about that's about distance, right? In other words, you can't really see the humor in something if it's so much about you that then it becomes drama, then it becomes dramatic, right? And I don't think there's any value. I mean, there's no value judgment there. I think they're both equally valuable and equally useful. I also want to say that I think the best drama always has to have some comic element in it too, right? And then the converse of that is true. The best comic fiction, or the best humor writing, has to also be aware of the fact that what it's critiquing is serious.
And so that makes me think, so you're saying that in part the element of humor or the comedy might come out in the sense that the narrators or the characters they're attempting to maintain a greater sense of control or wisdom by distancing themselves from their situation, more so than it being like a flat or searing or just something that's mean. They're injecting humor, both for themselves and for the reader.
Yeah, I think all comedy is also, particularly, or all humor writing, particularly when it's coming from a character's perspective, reflects that character is being self-protective, right? They're putting up that kind of comedy as kind of they're joking as kind of a force feed, right? You know, I think in the novella that's titled the book, Martha's Daughter, I think Cynthia, the daughter, Cynthia is so guarded and protected from the world that the only way that she can navigate her way through the world is through that self-protection, right? Which comes out as this kind of ironic and sometimes bitter humor.
Who's your favorite comedian, or what's your favorite comedy?
Well, I'm. That's how I feel. It has nothing to do with whatever. I love I love stupid physical comedy. If somebody is if somebody's falling down or being having something having stupid stuff thrown at them or they're just being dumb, it's for some reason I just find that stuff hysterical. In other words, that's me saying that the less intellectual it is, the more appealing it's to me. The dumber it is, the more appealing it is to me.
Well, speaking of absurdity, so you have quite a body of work. And these recent short stories seem pretty fresh. And I mean, I guess one question that I have is, what's the earliest short story that was published? Like, what's the were these stories collected over the span of so many years, or did they all come out in the span of like 5 years? Or could you talk to us about the timeline of the original publication?
These stories were written over many years. The first story that was published in this book was a story taking Miss Kazee to the polls, which is maybe the first story that I ever published, I think. And so that's the oldest story in the book. And that story's actually been around a while. That story's been recorded twice for selected shorts. That's how long it's been around. They just keep recording it, and they keep playing that story on selected shorts. Every time I turn to selected shorts, that story's on. So sick of that story. Let's see. But then the majority of them were written in the last 10 years. So.
And how did you come upon the arrangement? I think of one of the things that's difficult about a short story versus, say, a novel or novella is that it's almost like a poetry collection or, say, an album, is that you have to figure out what's the best story to frame, the types of stories that are in the collection or even ground the world, and then what are the stories that kind of occur in the middle, and then exactly how are you going to end the thing. So do you have any particular arrangement strategy? Or do you look to other mediums for your arrangements?
Oh, that's tough. There were sort of two people that advised the ordering of these stories. One was my agent Kima, and the other was the series editor Erica, and they kind of really gave me some advice about that. The big question that we had was whether to put the novella first or last, and that's the thing that's primarily shaped the ordering of the rest of the collection. And we eventually ended up with it in the first position, which I think is the best position for it. I also think that there was. There was the other thing that was important in this collection is that there are three, in addition to the novella, there's two stories that are where the character Martha is around in the story. So we wanted those not to be on top of each other. So we didn't want to have, all Martha and then switch to something else. So.
And so speaking to timing, the contemporary moment, and then your characters and your body of work, I was really wondering about Marshall from right by my side. And I was wondering if you have access to the character, you can think about it. What would he think about the world today? Or like, what is he doing? If he woke up and read the news, what kind of insights would he have?
You mean, would he be screaming differently than the rest of us? That's your question, Ron. Marshall is a product of, the Reagan administration. So, there are similarities, right? You're not open up, are you?
I mean,
I just can't with that. to say that. I think that the only, let me just say, I can't imagine anything more horrible than, or how more terrifying than being a young person of color in 2025. And particularly in, for example, right now, today in Chicago, I mean, those young people must just be terrified. So, maybe with that.
Well, so that brings us back to this idea of arrangement and the way that the stories are operating throughout. I really was impressed by the way or the place where on the American Heritage Trail appeared. I got a chance to read this on the American Heritage Trail before the collection came out, and it offered this really great conversation about class and culture and where folks find their placement in the world. So could you talk a little bit about this story in particular and why you chose it to, be the knockout end of your collection?
That was one of the decisions that was that Kima Jones made and Erica signed up on. I don't know that I would have put that collection, that story last, but they convinced me that it was the perfect coda.
Mm-hmm.
It was the story that really kind of brought everything together. That story I think is dark, but it has a somewhat hopeful turn at the end of it. I mean, it's a story that ultimately is about home, regardless of how challenging and maybe unappealing to some that particular home might be. So I think it maybe allows the book to have a nice turn up. And a couple of the reviews that have been coming in from around the country on the book have also noted that was a good place to end the collection.
So speaking of home, as a native St. Louisan, I really appreciated the way that you explored St. Louis's geography. And when I engaged with writing about the geography in St. Louis, I'm particularly concerned with the divide between the city and the county. And it's like I really appreciate the way that your descriptions are nuanced and you focus on different neighborhoods and you're able to get to different conceptions of class. So could you talk more about the importance of that particular geography and the way that it shows up in your work?
So I think one of the things I want to talk about that in terms of first of all, other places that I've lived. So in terms of all the books that I've written and all of these stories, I think that I've only written one novel, or maybe even just part of one novel that takes place in Minnesota. There's one story in here that takes place in Minnesota. And I lived in Texas for 20 long years. And there's two stories in there that are about Texas, neither of them we thought it was a good place. But all my other, St. Louis is the place that's always been a place of my imagination. So, my characters are, of course, always sort of finding themselves in different parts of the city and the county. And I try to remember in this collection, maybe you remember that better than I do, because I actually don't have a copy of the book. I'm just holding that at random for people at home. But I actually don't remember, do my characters ever use the word city or county?
I don't believe so. It's always a specific neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's always a specific neighborhood, and that's what I mean. I don't know if I wouldn't call it necessarily an effort at coding, but it's like when I was reading it, it made perfect sense to me that maybe a group of women having a lingerie party in St. Charles like says a lot that I immediately got.
Say no
But,
more, right?
but then after, it's only now that I really think like, oh, that's interesting because someone else might think like, well, St. Charles, it just sounds like, So I don't, and you never actually said like city or county, it's just specific neighborhoods, but you had in a sentence or two like real insight into what that neighborhood is like, and it was really dexterous and like rangy.
Thanks. I mean, I think that one of the things that's sort of interesting to me about that is that, I don't, when a place sort of inhabits your imagination and you sort of, live in that place in your imagination, or your imagination lives in that place, you don't actually think about it sociologically, but then the part of you that's a writer, right, that has to realize you're communicating something, right? You realize that, well, if I just say Jefferson County, which is where the character of Janine is from in the novella, that doesn't mean anything unless you give it what Cynthia thinks Jefferson County means, right? So you kind of have to do that little writerly trick of putting those few things in there. But whenever I talk about this with my writing students, one of the things I say is that it has to do with that kind of bias that exists in literature, where the assumption is that people can talk about any place in New York City, and we all know what that means, right? Neighborhoods are already sort of coded in our imagination, but in other parts of the country, and I would say almost every part of the country, that isn't the case. So I think that again, I write about the place that I know, and the places that my characters go to in the place that I know, right? Or the places that I've known. And one of the things in 2006, I was working on this novel. I just forgot the name of the novel. I was working on this novel. It has a yellow cover. It's called Star in the Face of the Sky, right? And so I had to come, and so I put in this application to not be in SMU for a semester, because I didn't want to be in Dallas anymore. So I came up and taught at UMSL, and Andrea was in that class, and so I came up, and one of the reasons I did that, because the novel takes place in St. Louis, and I needed to come up and just drive around a lot, because I hadn't been sort of living here full time for any period of time. So I just spent a lot of time sort of remembering where things were in relation to each other, just to sort of re-get the geography. So, but it's sort of all in there. I mean, sort of knew where I wanted my characters to move through the city, but I just needed to remember.
Well, let me throw out a couple more questions. So you just spoke a lot about imagination, and then you described a method of just reacquainting yourself with a familiar place or city, just driving around. And there's something that's very like mood oriented. That part of it is having that specific
You and me both. Well, my work sort of finds its roots in the voices of the characters, and so they have to start talking to me first, and then they start telling me their story, or I find the story for them to start telling. Right, but it's always driven by having to have a voice that's sort of guiding the journey, and whether that's the voice of the actual narration, or whether they're telling the story, or whether it's how the story is being told in their head to the reader, whichever, that's way too deep in the weeds, I think, but it always starts with voice. Yeah. And also, like I said, so if you're also looking for where does that come from, I'm really nosy, and I love going to places and just listen to people talk, and particularly if it's none of my business, writing, it's all material. Perhaps some people will recognize themselves in some of the things that are in these stories. Maybe some people in this room.
So one last question for the moment. So out of the selection, you have just some really standout stories and some really great moments throughout. This might be an unfair question, but which story are you proudest of? Or which one?
No.
What about which story posed the greatest challenge?
All right, that's a good question. All right, so I can go. And I was going to say that novella was the hardest because it was the hardest to find an ending for. But the most difficult story in the book is there's a story called Dear Daniel Davis, which is a letter that this woman is writing to her son. And the reason that story was so challenging is that this character is, the woman who's writing this letter is mentally ill. And it was really hard to figure out how to represent that on the page without doing justice to her illness, but also not being exploitative or cliche about it. And that was a real challenge. Took a long time to figure out how to do that. I knew what I wanted to write long before I knew how to tell that story, because it was so. Also, when you're writing a story, this. When you're writing a story, you have to be in that character's space, and you have to kind of become that character for a while. And that was a really hard head to be inside of. So that was the hardest thing to write.
All right. So what do you think? Do you want to read something for us?
A little bit. Okay. So I'm just gonna read a little bit. All right. So this story is I've chosen this part. This is a part of Martha's Daughter. I tell you what page it's on, but I don't have the same edition.
You wanna?
No, I can't, because I had marked it in here. So because this is the edition that I have, because they haven't sent me a copy yet. Oh, and by the way, this troll, I know, Richard, he's out there, said, "Oh, why don't you just buy a copy of your own book?" So
I thought you went, David.
no, they're expensive to give me. And again, I'm gonna ride this until that box of books shows up in the lobby. I've been down there every day looking for that box. So, and tell me, my neighbors are, you have to move a lot of stuff around to find your box. So I was down there this afternoon looking for my box. So this a friend of mine is having this. This is dedicated to her because she's having a crisis right now that's related to this story. So I can tell you later what the crisis is. All right, so this is from Martha's Daughter, and in this point of the story, Cynthia, who is Martha's daughter, is in the car with her friend, her co-worker Janine, and they're going to, they're on their way to the funeral home. And Cynthia's sort of avoiding getting there. So tell me more about your mom, she says quietly. She's hard to describe, I mumble to Janine, and I swallow as I mumble, in hopes that this might sound to her as if my voice has broken with grief. And it's a lie, of course. Brilliant, manipulative, domineering, mean. I can describe my mother for days. I have zero desire to do so. I don't know what to say about mine either, Janine replies, saving me from further dissembling. What is it, past 11 on a Tuesday, and she's likely walking around that dollar store again, or up gambling on the boat, if she's even out of bed. This one time, oh, say, look, we got that same Chinese buffet down by our place. The camera is oddly magnetized to where her finger points when I take the exit. I didn't mean to suggest, Jean protests, which I wave away. A little lunch might make all the smoother for Janine and for me. I pay for both of us, grab a platter the size of a hubcap and build a plate in homage to Martha. All of her favorites, some greasy-looking young patties, a few chunks of fried something with pieces of onion and red pepper adhering to the sticky shine, and a tower of crab rangoon, which I slather in sauce. This is the color of a post-nuclear dawn. Janine, by contrast, works her way around the entire buffet, the spoonful of everything strategy. When she's finished, there is no telling what is what and where one might even begin eating such a mess. But she digs in with the gusto of a girl who grew up on boxed macaroni and cheese and not nearly enough of it. Yum, she comments on one bite, and yum, she comments on the next. The food is okay. One thing Martha Garrison knew was Chinese food, and this is mild, lower standard. I can hear her now. Too much cornstarch in this gravy. Or fried rice don't mean boiled in grease rice. Back in her lucid days, the phone would ring in my office Friday at 4 like clockwork. Stop up at that Chinaman's on Woodson Road on your way over here and get my usual. Remind me an extra egg and onion on the rice. The casual racism of our parents. Enchanting, is it not? That I might have had plans for the evening, or that they might not have included the stop at the Chinaman's, or that her house was never part of, or coming to her house was never a part of Martha Garrison's calculation. They all knew her to all these Chinamen in every storefront duck and noodle shop between Pagedale and Cape Coral, and their wives too. How's your mama? Say hi to your mother. Tell Martha to come by and see me. She'd be constantly on the outs with one or another of them for shorting her order or for scrimping on her shrimp. And then the phone calls stopped, and Martha Garrison took to wandering. I had my Fridays to myself. I spear an onion and find a bit of the tough white root that hadn't been trimmed away. Martha would be up and into that kitchen and throw, and there would be hell to pay. Janine thrust in my general direction. Jean thrust in the general direction of my face something golden brown with a clear glaze. What's this, she asks. Did you get any of this? I shake my head. Because it sure is good. This sauce is like lemon or orange or something. She bites hunk off the glob and examines the remainder as if it were a lab specimen. Definitely orange, she says. I smile at her triumph, and with her lips she snatches into her maw the rest of the meat from the fork. She's a savorer, this Janine, something she'd share in common with my mother. Every bite is lip-smacking delicious. She has an entire repertoire of, thankfully, mostly inaudible noises to signal her intense pleasure this food provides. Her eyes roll into the sky in ecstatic gratitude until the lids lower to dreamy half-mast. Tell me not to go back for seconds, she orders me. But I encourage her to go knock herself out because I blame my lack of appetite on a large breakfast that I, in fact, did not eat. That was dedicated to my friend Kathy, who's not here. She did have a recent tragedy. her favorite Chinese buffet clothes. It's immigration training.
Oh.
So anyway. All right. Go ahead.
Let's go ahead and open up the floor to questions.
And all the questions up there. Questions.
Yeah, somebody.
Should have took David was nice. I'm not used to that. This is it on. Oh.
Anybody have a question?
I read the interview that you posted on Facebook about direct address. And you said that the narrator and Martha's daughter is addressing the readers. And that the readers are assumed to be white. Can you tell us more about that, about the addressing the reader and why you chose to have that voice?
That's a great question. So, and that idea was there from the very first sentence when I started writing Martha's Daughter, when I started the novella. And the idea in the novella is that Cynthia has all this rage, I think, about her situation in life, which is having to live and work in largely in a white community and sort of being separated from her own community. And a lot of that because of her mother's encouragement for her to, quote, raise herself up in the world. And so that direct address is about sort of a manifestation of that rage. And then that we'll just say this isn't much a spoiler, but that nature of who she's talking to shifts at the end of the novella in a really interesting way. You can ask anything. We'll see.
Are any characters based off of nosy neighbors or loud neighbors?
I'm the loud neighbor. I'm the one with the loud music at all hours of the day and night. But I have good taste in music, don't
You gave me a copy of
somebody else's mama.
No.
What's the name of
The Matilda.
Full Matilda.
Full Matilda. Yes. And that was years ago. But as I look at your current work, I see you're coming from the female perspective again. Is your close circle an influence, or is that really a focus for you?
So I think there are two. Are there two stories in this book, or three that are told from? I should know. Why am I asking you this?
I understand exactly. But yes, you did have more women characters.
There are like three that are from male points of view, right?
Okay.
So by the way, I've already, just so you know, Marsha, I've been doing a lot of interviews with for various things all over the country or whatever. And this is the question I've been ducking regularly.
Really?
Because I actually don't understand. I mean, because I don't really know the answer to that question. I do think that, for example, in this story, the point of view, the main character in this story is arguably Martha, and not her mother. But the only person that knows Martha is her daughter Cynthia. So Cynthia has to sort of be the narrator in the story because they're both sort of isolated in their world. So the stories sort of have to find the narrator that they have, right? Or that needs to tell the story. In that one book, I can't remember the name of the yellow one, which the Star in the Face of the Sky. That's the one. That book actually has 5 or 6 narrators and they're all different. So I just tend to write from a lot of different places.
Okay.
Anybody else?
He was gonna ask you what kind of music you listen
Oh, okay. So I'm going to say that for on October 3rd, there'll be an article that's going to, there's an online magazine called Large Hearted Boy, where which you put in your playlist for the book. And so my Large Hearted Boy list is publishing on October 3rd. And it lists a song for each of the stories in the book.
Oh,
That's cool.
I did want to follow up on your use of gender in your narrators. One thing that I was thinking of, and it could just be completely me, when I'm thinking of your stories where it's a woman narrating, it seems that the way that she's seeing the world and navigating it and focusing on survival or kind of gaming out her position seems more necessary. Or even the cynicism almost seems more forgivable. But then when I think of the stories, You're Not From Texas, and then on the American Trail, and even though our male character in the American Trail he's kind of sweet, relatively. That's not to say that he's unlikable or anything. There seems to be the cynicism seems. Oh, I guess the best way I can put it is not intentionally aggressive. Like they're not necessarily predatory, but it seems more like the way they're gaming things out is more offensive than defensive. And I don't know if that's just an effect that that's just one thing that changes based on the gender, because in the way they're conceived, it makes sense the way they're navigating things. But gender does seem to have an effect. But again, I met a lot there.
Thank you. That's my answer.
I think it's like switching between different narrators in different places. Like that's always amazing. Like that's technical mastery.
Thank you. It's none of this is conscious. One of the things about one of the perils of answering questions about your work is that so much what we do is, my other writer friends out there in the audience can attest to this, it's that you're doing this stuff unconsciously, or you're not sort of. This is what I say to my writing students, that craft should be sort of like when you're a teacher, an elementary school teacher, which I was for 15 years, never sick, never late. A lot of different careers. So I have a lot of different careers. I have a lot of careers. Where was that? What were they saying? Oh, okay. So when you teach elementary school, when you teach people spelling and grammar and things like that, mechanics, you teach them those things so that they can forget them. Mm-hmm. So when they sit down to write a sentence or speak, they don't think about whether or not where the comma goes or how to spell it where it's already in there, right? Mm-hmm. So craft is the same thing. You learn craft so that when you're actually sitting down to write a story, you can forget it, right? And so that's why it's so difficult, I think, to talk about your process sometimes, because you're not really conscious. You shouldn't be sort of consciously thinking about how you're doing work when you're doing work. You should just kind of be doing it. So, yeah, that makes sense.
No, that's perfect. Do you think there's a difference between storytelling and writing? Which, sometimes writing is good and really strong, but you can kind of tell when someone's writing versus storytelling. And I always think about it that one of the I've known several really great storytellers, but years and years ago, I used to work in the pasta house down the street from here. And the cooks were amazing storytellers. And I still think about, especially if I'm at a place where I get a little stuck in a story, that cook telling me whatever day-to-day stories he comes into my mind, and he's like, "Oh, you just do this." And I'm like, okay. So even those patterns, those structures, are just that way of engaging the reader or charming them. I don't think about oh, I need these types of sentences or gerund, or I need to have this density. I just think, how does someone actually tell a story? Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that? Is there, is it fair to say there's sometimes there's writing and then there's storytelling, or is there any kind of advice you have for people to access that natural storytelling?
I think that one of the things that they don't teach in writing programs in is how to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
They teach people how to create certain effects, a lot of different kinds of effects, but they don't teach people how to tell a story. So they're different arts. So what oral storytellers have is just they understand the ability to they know how to spin a yarn and they know how to make it entertaining, right? And so I think that the writers can learn a lot from storytellers, right? A lot, and I do think that I don't want to say that. So. I mean, there may be people up there. I don't know if there's anybody up there at all. But
what do you guys think? What else?
I think we're going to sign books.
How did you begin your writing career? What was the impetus for your beginning writing books?
You mean writing books or writing or just writing in general?
Stories.
Okay, so I wrote my first story when I was in 6th grade. My mother had this raggedy old typewriter. It was a really raggedy old typewriter with a ribbon in it, which had and it needed a new ribbon long before I started typing on this thing. And I was I took it to school and my sixth teacher, Mr. Blackman, liked the story and he read it to the class and I was hooked. The class liked it and said, I can do that. So that kind of got me started writing. In college, I kind of knew I wanted to do it, but they didn't have really great creative writing department at my nameless college in St. Paul, Minnesota. Begins with an M. And so I sort of had to figure it out on my own. So I spent a lot of time sort of figuring out on my own. I didn't go to an MFA. I don't have an MFA. I just sort of figured a lot of stuff out and wrote a few things, and here we are today.
That's right.
It was that fast. We're gonna sign books pretty soon, aren't we?
Yeah, thank you all so very much. Thank you so much to David, to Ron. I think we're gonna cut off the live stream and yeah, sign some books. Thank you all so much.
One more thing, the live stream is off. Just really quickly, I want to say, first of all, I'm so appreciative of Left Bank Books Foundation for hosting this, for having me here. 30xxx years ago, I would